The year was 1973, and the boxing world was about to witness one of the most extraordinary chapters in sports history, though few knew it at the time. George Foreman stood as an imposing figure, undefeated and seemingly unstoppable, having just demolished Joe Frazier to claim the heavyweight championship of the world. His punches carried the force of sledgehammers. His presence in the ring struck fear into the hearts of opponents, and his path of destruction left boxing experts convinced they were witnessing perhaps the most formidable heavyweight fighter who had ever lived. Meanwhile, Muhammad Ali, the people's champion, the Louisville Lip, was fighting his way back to relevance after 3 years of exile from the sport for refusing military service. Though his speed and reflexes had diminished, his ambition burned as brightly as ever. What happened next, behind closed doors on a rainy night in Chicago, would alter the trajectory of both men's lives and change boxing history forever. Before I continue, this channel exists because of you. If you're already feeling the emotion in this story, subscribe now. It's quick, easy, and makes all the difference to me. Few boxing insiders gave Ali much chance against the younger, stronger Foreman. The matchup seemed almost cruel, a fading legend against a devastating puncher in his prime. Bookmakers installed Foreman as a 7-1 favorite, and even Ali's closest friends privately worried about his safety. But behind the scenes, a desperate plan was taking shape, one that would require absolute secrecy, perfect execution, and nerves of steel. It began with a phone call from Angelo Dundee, Ali's legendary trainer, to an unexpected recipient, a man who had no business receiving such a call, given the stakes and circumstances. The call was made to Archie Moore, a boxing legend in his own right, who had a connection to both fighters, but whose loyalty ultimately belonged to one. The meeting was set for October 12, 1973, at a small, nondescript diner on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of place where conversations could disappear into the ambient noise of clattering dishes and hissing coffee machines. Dundee arrived first, selecting a booth in the far corner, his back to the wall, eyes tracking every person who entered. When Foreman's trainer Dick Sadler walked in 30 minutes later, the tension in the air was palpable. These were men from opposing camps, men who should not be seen together, especially not with the biggest heavyweight title fight in years potentially looming on the horizon. But desperation makes for strange bedfellows, and both men understood that what they were about to discuss could never leave this booth. "I appreciate you coming," Dundee said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wouldn't have reached out if there were any other way." Sadler nodded curtly, his expression giving away nothing. "I'm here to listen, that's all. No promises." What happened over the next 2 hours remains one of boxing's most closely guarded secrets, a conversation that would set in motion a chain of events culminating in perhaps the greatest upset in sports history. According to one witness, a waitress who overheard fragments of their hushed conversation, money changed hands that night, a substantial amount. But money was only part of the equation. Information was the real currency being traded, information about George Foreman that only his trainer would know, his weaknesses, his breaking points, the psychological triggers that could transform the seemingly invincible champion into something altogether more human and vulnerable. The world would later come to know these insights as the blueprint for the rope-a-dope, the strategy Ali would employ in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle fight in Kinshasa, Zaire. But on that night, in that diner, what transpired was nothing short of betrayal. A trainer selling out his fighter, providing the opposition with the keys to unlocking his destruction. The question that has haunted boxing historians ever since is simple. Why would Dick Sadler, George Foreman's trusted trainer, do such a thing? The answer, like most things in the murky world of professional boxing, is complicated by money, loyalty, and the personal demons that drive men to make devastating choices. As the meeting concluded, both men left separately, careful not to be seen together. What they didn't know was that their conversation had been overheard by someone else, a young sports reporter named Michael Torrance, who had stopped in for a late dinner after covering a local basketball game. Torrance recognized both men immediately, but couldn't believe they would be meeting like this. He slipped into the booth adjacent to theirs and strained to hear their conversation over the diner's ambient noise. What he heard would haunt him for years, a secret too dangerous to publish, but too significant to forget. "Foreman fights angry," Sadler had said, his voice dropping to ensure no one could hear. "When he's angry, he's dangerous, but he's also careless. He throws everything into every punch. If a man could weather that storm, if he could somehow survive those first 4 or 5 rounds. George has never had to go deep into a fight. His gas tank is untested. His mind is untested. Make him miss, make him work, make him doubt himself. That's when you'll see a different George Foreman." Dundee had leaned forward, hanging on every word. "And the ropes? I've been thinking about using the ropes." Sadler nodded slowly. "The ropes could work. George doesn't know how to handle a man on the ropes. He'll empty his tank trying to finish him. And those rings in Africa, I hear they're making them extra bouncy. That could help your man absorb the punishment." "How much?" Dundee asked finally. Sadler wrote a number on a napkin and slid it across the table. Dundee looked at it, nodded once, and the deal was sealed, a deal that would change boxing history forever. For months after their clandestine meeting, Angelo Dundee worked tirelessly with Ali, implementing a strategy that flew in the face of conventional boxing wisdom. Ali, known for his dancing, his speed, his ability to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, would now stand his ground against the most fearsome puncher in heavyweight history. The boxing world thought Ali had lost his mind when rumors of this strategy began to leak. Former champions, trainers, and boxing writers alike predicted not just defeat, but serious injury for the former champion. "It would be like a man standing in front of a freight train," said one commentator. "Ali's pride will get him killed in there," said another. Even in Ali's own camp, doubts festered. Drew Bundini Brown, Ali's charismatic assistant trainer and motivator, confronted Dundee after watching Ali practice leaning against the ropes during sparring sessions. "What are you doing to him, Angie?" Bundini demanded. "This ain't our fighter. Our man dances, he doesn't stand there taking punishment." But Dundee remained steadfast, knowing what no one else in Ali's camp knew, that they had the blueprint for defeating Foreman, delivered by the one man who knew all his weaknesses. Meanwhile, in Foreman's camp, Dick Sadler carried the weight of his betrayal, watching his fighter prepare for a battle he had secretly undermined. Foreman trained with his usual intensity, destroying sparring partners with frightening ease, confirming in his mind and in the minds of observers that Ali had no chance. "I hit him one time. He'll think he's been hit by a Mack truck," Foreman told reporters during a rare interview. "2 times, he'll wonder what country he's in. 3 times, his people will need to come into the ring and get him." What Foreman didn't know was that his trainer had already determined his fate, trading his victory for reasons that remain contested to this day. Some say it was money, that Sadler had gambling debts that needed immediate resolution. Others suggest more complex motivations, that Sadler had been an admirer of Ali's stand against the Vietnam War and secretly wanted to see him reclaim the championship that had been stripped from him unjustly. A third theory, perhaps the most troubling, suggests that Sadler had become afraid of Foreman, witnessing disturbing behavior in private that made him question whether the power and fame of being heavyweight champion was having a corrupting influence on the young fighter. As the fight in Zaire approached, tensions within both camps escalated. Ali ramped up his psychological warfare, taunting Foreman relentlessly at every opportunity, calling him the mummy for his stiff fighting style, questioning his intelligence, and positioning himself as the true representative of Black America, despite Foreman's own African-American heritage. "George may be fighting for America," Ali told reporters, "but I'm fighting for all the oppressed people in the world." Behind closed doors, however, Ali was wrestling with his own doubts. The gap between his public bravado and private fears widened as the fight drew nearer. 2 weeks before departing for Africa, he summoned Dundee to his private quarters late one night. "This better work, Angie," Ali said, his usual playfulness absent. "That man hits too hard for games. If what you're planning doesn't work, they'll be bringing me home in a box." Dundee placed a reassuring hand on Ali's shoulder. "Trust me, Mohammed. I know George Foreman better than he knows himself now." When pressed for details, Dundee was circumspect, revealing only that he had sources close to Foreman who had provided valuable insights. The truth, that Foreman's own trainer had sold him out, was too explosive to share even with Ali himself. Some secrets needed to remain buried, at least until the fight was over. The scene shifted to Kinshasa, Zaire, where the unlikely setting for this historic clash added another layer of drama to the unfolding story. Both fighters arrived to tremendous fanfare, but it quickly became apparent that the local population had chosen sides. "Ali Bomaye," "Ali, kill him," became the chant that followed the former champion everywhere he went. Foreman, by contrast, found himself cast as the villain, a role he neither sought nor understood. The hostility of the environment began to wear on Foreman. He grew increasingly isolated, training behind high walls, avoiding public appearances. His mood darkened, and those close to him noticed a change in his demeanor. The unflappable champion was showing cracks in his armor before a single punch had been thrown. Dick Sadler watched this transformation with a mixture of guilt and grim satisfaction, knowing that the psychological aspect of his betrayal was already taking effect. On the eve of the fight, another secret meeting took place, this time between Dundee and the enigmatic Don King, the fight's promoter who had risen from the streets of Cleveland to become a powerful force in boxing. King had invested everything in making this fight happen, and rumors swirled that he stood to lose millions if it didn't live up to the global hype he had generated. Some witnesses later claimed they overheard King telling Dundee, "Make it memorable. The world is watching." This needs to be more than a fight. It needs to be a moment in history. Whether that conversation influenced what happened next remains one of boxing's great unanswered questions. What is certain is that when Muhammad Ali stepped into the ring in the early morning hours of October 30th, 1974, he carried with him not just his own dreams of reclaiming the heavyweight crown, but also the secret knowledge provided by his opponent's trusted trainer, knowledge that would prove decisive in the battle to come. The fight itself has been described countless times by those more qualified than I to analyze its technical aspects. What matters for our story is that Ali did exactly what Dick Sadler had suggested might work. He weathered Foreman's early onslaught, leaning against the ropes, covering up, whispering taunts into Foreman's ear as the champion threw punishing blow after punishing blow. "That all you got, George?" Ali would say after absorbing combinations that would have felled any other heavyweight. "My grandmother hits harder than you." As the fight progressed into the middle rounds, the unthinkable began to happen. Foreman, who had never needed to pace himself in previous bouts, began to slow down. His punches, while still powerful, lost their snap. His breathing became labored. Most significantly, doubt began to creep into his eyes, exactly as Sadler had predicted it would. The invincible champion was experiencing vulnerability for the first time, and he had no reference point for how to handle it. In Foreman's corner between rounds, Dick Sadler found himself in the surreal position of trying to undo the very situation he had helped create. "Calm down, George," he urged, as Foreman gasped for air after the 5th round. "Pace yourself. He's trying to tire you out." But the advice came too late. The seeds of defeat had been planted months earlier in that Chicago diner. and now they were bearing their inevitable fruit. When Ali knocked out Foreman in the 8th round, sending the seemingly invincible champion crashing to the canvas like a fallen redwood, it was more than just a victory. It was the culmination of one of the greatest acts of sports espionage ever perpetrated. As Ali celebrated in the center of the ring, arms raised in triumph, Dick Sadler slipped away quietly, carrying the burden of his betrayal, a secret he would take to his grave many years later. In the aftermath of the fight, George Foreman fell into a deep depression. The man who had never contemplated defeat now couldn't escape its shadow. He fired Dick Sadler 6 months later, citing irreconcilable differences, but never publicly suggesting any suspicion of betrayal. Years afterward, when asked about his former trainer, Foreman would simply say, "Some chapters of your life you just have to close and move on from. That's one of them for me." Ali, meanwhile, cemented his legacy as the greatest, not knowing that his most famous victory had been aided by an invisible hand. Angelo Dundee kept the secret of that Chicago meeting, understanding that revealing it would tarnish not just Ali's achievement, but also the sport itself. Boxing, after all, trades on the premise that what happens in the ring is real and undetermined, that while preparations may be meticulous, the outcome remains subject to the warrior's skill, heart, and destiny. The truth might have remained buried forever, if not for Michael Torrance, the young reporter who had overheard that fateful conversation in the diner. Torrance kept detailed notes, but sat on the story for decades, torn between journalistic obligation and the knowledge that publishing would destroy lives and legacies. Finally, in 2005, with both Ali and Foreman long retired and Dick Sadler deceased, Torrance shared his account with a small boxing publication. The story created a brief stir in boxing circles, but never gained mainstream traction. Perhaps because few wanted to believe that one of sport's most iconic moments had been compromised. When confronted with Torrance's account, Angelo Dundee, then in his 80s, offered a cryptic response. "Boxing's a hurt business in more ways than one. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones you can see." He neither confirmed nor denied the meeting, but acknowledged that in preparing for Foreman, we had insights that proved valuable. Leave it at that. The most fascinating postscript to this story involves George Foreman himself. After a 10-year retirement following the loss to Ali, Foreman made an improbable comeback in his 40s, eventually reclaiming a portion of the heavyweight championship at the age of 45, becoming the oldest heavyweight champion in history. Those close to Foreman suggest that driving his comeback was not just a desire to prove his greatness, but also to rewrite the narrative of that night in Kinshasa, to prove that what happened there was an aberration rather than a true reflection of his fighting heart. In a rare moment of reflection during a 2007 interview, Foreman came closest to acknowledging his suspicions about what happened before the Ali fight. "Sometimes in life, you think everyone in your corner is actually in your corner," he said. "That's not always the case. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I forgave those who may have wronged me long ago. That's the only way I could find peace and move forward with my life." The story of that secret meeting in Chicago and its profound consequences offers a window into the complex, often morally ambiguous world of professional boxing, where loyalty can be fluid and the line between strategy and betrayal razor thin. It also serves as a reminder that behind every great sporting moment there often lies a hidden story, one that might change how we view the achievement but doesn't necessarily diminish its place in history. Today, both Ali and Foreman are revered as legends of the sport, their legacies secured not just by their accomplishments in the ring, but by how they lived their lives outside it. Ali became a global humanitarian, his courage in battling Parkinson's disease inspiring millions. Foreman transformed from the intimidating champion of his youth into a beloved figure, famous for his good humor and entrepreneurial success with the George Foreman grill. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story is how both men transcended the controversy that secretly connected them. Whether or not that meeting in Chicago determined the outcome in Kinshasa, what cannot be denied is the character both champions displayed in the decades that followed. Ali in facing his illness with dignity, Foreman in reinventing himself and finding success in a second chapter few could have imagined. In boxing, as in life, victories and defeats are rarely as straightforward as they seem from the outside. Behind every triumph lies sacrifice, behind every strategy lurks doubt, and sometimes, behind the greatest moments in sports history, there are secrets that reshape our understanding without diminishing our appreciation for the warriors who step into the arena. The rumble in the jungle remains one of boxing's defining moments, a brilliant tactical victory, a triumph of will over power, and now, with the passage of time, a reminder that in seeking the truth about the past, we sometimes uncover stories more nuanced and human than the legends they helped create. As George Foreman himself once said, "Trust me, the truth is always more interesting than what people tell you happened." In the case of that secret meeting in Chicago and all that followed, those words have proven prophetic indeed. The years passed, and the principals in this extraordinary drama took divergent paths. Ali continued his reign as heavyweight champion until his skills diminished to the point where even his remarkable heart couldn't compensate. His later fights against Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick stand as painful footnotes to a glorious career. Contests he should never have engaged in, but couldn't resist due to financial pressures and the addictive roar of the crowd. As his boxing career ended, his battle with Parkinson's disease began, a cruel twist for a man whose gift of gab had been as formidable as his fighting skills. Foreman's journey took more surprising turns. After his loss to Ali, he fought several more times before a religious epiphany following a loss to Jimmy Young in 1977 led him to retire and become an ordained minister. For 10 years, he disappeared from the public eye, preaching in his Houston church, his fearsome boxing persona replaced by a gentler, more contemplative figure. When financial difficulties forced his return to boxing in 1987, few took him seriously. Overweight and a decade removed from the sport, he seemed destined for embarrassment. Instead, what followed was one of sport's most remarkable second acts. Fighting a patient, methodical style that bore little resemblance to the whirlwind destroyer of his youth, Foreman slowly climbed the heavyweight rankings. His punch, if slower, remained devastating. His chin, always granite, had seemingly hardened further with age. Most significantly, the scowling, intimidating champion had been replaced by a smiling, self-deprecating everyman who connected with audiences in ways the younger Foreman never could. Dick Sadler was not part of this comeback. Having parted ways with Foreman after the Ali defeat, he drifted through boxing's periphery, working with lesser fighters, his reputation diminished by Foreman's loss, though the reasons remained his secret. He died in 2001, taking to his grave the full truth of what transpired in that Chicago diner. In his final years, according to those close to him, he was haunted by his actions, occasionally speaking cryptically about debts that can never be repaid and choices that follow you forever. Angelo Dundee continued his legendary career as boxing's preeminent trainer, working with champions like Sugar Ray Leonard while maintaining his special bond with Ali. When questioned about the Foreman fight strategies in later years, he would credit Ali's boxing intelligence and physical courage, never hinting at the advantage provided by Sadler's betrayal. Muhammad figured Foreman out himself, Dundee maintained publicly. That was his genius. He could solve puzzles in the ring that would baffle most fighters. The reporter, Michael Torrance, struggled with his knowledge for decades. the ethical weight of his silence growing heavier as the rumble in the jungle became enshrined as one of sport's defining moments. When he finally published his account in a small boxing journal shortly before his death, the story created ripples, but never the tsunami of controversy he had feared. Perhaps too much time had passed, or perhaps the boxing world preferred the legend to the complicated truth. In 1994, 20 years after their historic bout, fate brought Ali and Foreman together at the former's 50th birthday celebration. By then, Ali's Parkinson's had advanced significantly, limiting his movement and speech. Foreman, recently crowned heavyweight champion again, after knocking out Michael Moorer, approached his former rival with visible emotion. Witnesses described a powerful moment as Foreman embraced Ali gently, whispering something in his ear that brought a smile to the birthday boy's trembling face. Later, when asked what he had said to Ali, Foreman revealed, "I told him he was the greatest fighter I ever faced, and that losing to him might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to become a better man." Whether Foreman ever learned the full truth about Sadler's betrayal remains uncertain. Some in his inner circle believe he had suspicions but chose not to pursue them, preferring to credit Ali's brilliance rather than diminish his own defining moment by claiming deception. Others suggest that in his spiritual awakening, Foreman found the capacity to forgive even those who had wronged him most profoundly, making the question of Sadler's loyalty ultimately irrelevant to his peace of mind. The legacy of that secret meeting extends beyond the individuals involved, raising questions about the nature of sports history itself. How many iconic moments have been shaped by hidden factors? How many legendary performances have been aided by unseen hands? And does knowing the full, complicated truth diminish or enhance our appreciation for what transpires in the arena? Perhaps the most telling commentary came from Foreman himself in his 2007 autobiography, where he wrote, "I've learned that losing to Muhammad Ali was necessary for me to become the man I am today. Without that defeat, I might have remained the angry, isolated champion, never knowing the joy of my later years. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters." Ali, though his voice was silenced by disease, expressed similar sentiments through his actions, maintaining a warm friendship with Foreman in their later years. At a sports awards ceremony in 1996, Ali, with trembling hands, helped adjust Foreman's bow tie before they went on stage together, a small gesture that spoke volumes about forgiveness and the bonds that can form between former adversaries. The rumble in the jungle remains boxing's most analyzed fight, studied by generations of fighters and trainers for its tactical brilliance. What few of them realize is that they are studying not just Ali's genius, but also the exploitation of insights provided by an act of betrayal, a hidden dimension that adds layers of complexity to an already legendary contest. In boxing circles, rumors of the Chicago meeting have periodically resurfaced, usually dismissed as conspiracy theories by mainstream historians of the sport. Yet those who knew Sadler well note that he never celebrated Foreman's defeats the way trainers typically mourn their fighters' losses. Instead, witnesses described a man who seemed relieved, even vindicated, as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The ultimate verdict on this remarkable story perhaps belongs neither to the participants nor to boxing historians, but to time itself, which has a way of smoothing the rough edges of controversy and focusing our attention on the enduring achievements rather than the messy human complexities behind them. The rumble in the jungle remains one of sport's defining moments, a brilliant tactical victory, a triumph of will over power, and now, with the passage of time, a reminder that in seeking the truth about the past, we sometimes uncover stories more nuanced and human than the legends they helped create. As both Ali and Foreman found peace with each other in their later years, perhaps we too can appreciate the full complexity of their shared history, not as a tale of heroes and villains, but as a profoundly human story of ambition, betrayal, redemption, and ultimately the capacity for growth that defines the truly great among us. If you reached this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing and commenting where you're watching from. If this truly touched you, give back. Comment, subscribe, come be part of this family with me until the next video.